If you've had some basic music education, as many of us in the States have had, you probably learned that there are two types of scales, major and minor. While this isn't false, it's also a much broader way of explaining music and the type of sound that you're hearing. There are more specific types of scales called modes. But first, welcome to Music Theories. This is a channel where I geek out about all things related to pop music, music history, and music theory. If you're returning, thank you. I appreciate you. And if you're new here, I hope you'll consider joining our community. Make sure you check out some of my other playlists and follow me on social media for additional content. While it's not a requirement in order to understand this video, I strongly encourage watching the previous segment on major versus minor to get the most out of this content. I have a Music Theories blog where you can not only read all of my scripts, but you can also download free resources to help you study, practice, and internalize music theory. If you find this video or this series helpful for you, I now have a super thanks option on my videos if you're feeling generous. I couldn't make any of this happen without you, so thank you. Modes are such a fundamental part of Western music that they can be traced all the way back to ancient Greece. In fact, modes were around before the concept of major and minor that we know of today. Even then, today we think of modes as scale variations derived from a parent scale. The way they teach modes, even in the most prestigious music schools, always felt overwhelming to me. Similar to my initial experience learning the circle of fifths, it felt like someone gave me a sheet of paper with a bunch of scales and told me to memorize them. So I did, and I passed the test, but I wasn't able to internalize the concept in a way that allowed me to deliberately use it as a tool in my composition. I had to revisit it on my own, and in doing so, someone very close to me explained this concept in a way that felt way more accessible to me. And now I want to share that with you. The traditional way to learn modes is in reference to the major scale. Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. What this means is that if Ionian mode starts on 1, then the Dorian mode will be those same notes, but starting on 2. Phrygian will be those same notes, but starting on 3. Lydian on 4, and so on and so forth. What's funny about music is that these are the exact same notes, but played in a different order, they sound like a different scale. Like I always say, in music, context is everything. So when you play a C major scale, but you start on D, everything now sounds like it's in context of D. It's no longer a C major scale. We've already seen this concept when we talked about major versus minor. If you play a major scale starting on the 6th degree of a scale, you'll get the relative minor scale, or the Aeolian scale. This means if someone asks you to write or play the A-Lydian scale, you'd have to go through the process of thinking about A as the 4th degree of an Ionian scale, which in this case is E. A is the 4th degree of E major, so if I play the E major scale starting on A, I get the A-Lydian scale. Now, many musicians learn modes as scales, or rather, melodic language rather than harmonic language. If you think about modes this way and it works for you, that's totally valid. But I want to present a different way of thinking about modes that makes a lot more sense in practice. This is not to say that modes are not scales, but their prominence in a piece of music doesn't come from the song's melody. Modes are actually harmonic language. In other words, your chord progression is what will make your song sound modal, not your melody. We're going to break up modes into different categories, and I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. But in order to understand the concept I'll be explaining today, you first need to ask yourself, what makes something sound major? What makes it sound dominant? What makes it sound minor, and so on? The answer to all of those questions is what we call guide tones. Guide tones are the 3rd and 7th degrees of a chord. This is a concept that was popularized in jazz and operates under the idea that these two notes are the most important notes in a chord, aside from the root. The intervallic distance of these notes will determine whether the chord is major, dominant, minor, or minor major. Now, the 5 is also a chord tone of the major chord, but it's not considered a guide tone because it remains the same in major, minor, and dominant. It's also the second harmonic or overtone to the tonic, which you can learn more about in my video about the overtone series. For these reasons, it's not considered a guide tone. However, the fifth degree in the diminished chord is very important because it's not diminished without the flat 5. More on that in a bit. The notes remaining in the scale are the second, the fourth, and the sixth. These are known as chord tensions. Tensions are often written as an octave above. So 2 is noted as 9, 4 as an 11, and 6 as a 13. If you play music, you've probably come across these numbers on at least a few chord charts. Now allow me to demonstrate. Here are my guide tones in C major. When I play just these 3 notes together, or the guide tones plus the root, it's called a shell voicing. I can fill in the rest with any chord tensions of my choosing, and it will still sound major. This is because of the guide tones. Here are some examples. Let's try the same thing with minor guide tones. The same concept applies. I can add any other notes to these 3 and it will still sound minor. Let's try the same thing with dominant guide tones. And no matter how we change the notes around the guide tones, it's still a dominant sound. With that in mind, let's begin naming some of the more specific modes, starting with major. We've already talked extensively about our first major mode. This is the standard major scale, or in this case, the Ionian scale. In the Ionian mode, everything is natural, relative to the root note. We learned about this by way of intervals in my video about building chords and scales. So when I talk about the Ionian scale, know that you can build the Ionian scale using these intervals: major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, and perfect octave. If you use this formula from any root note, everything will be considered natural relative to the root, despite having sharps or flats next to it. For example, in the key of A flat, the Ionian scale looks like this. Although B flat is present, this is considered the natural 2 relative to A flat, not flat 2. I know this can be a little confusing. This is why it's important to memorize your major scales. To keep it simple, we'll use C Ionian, since it has no sharps or flats. I've created a melody exclusively for this video to demonstrate how modes sound compared to each other. The melody won't change throughout the video. It sounds like this. Now I'll add an Ionian chord progression over this melody. We'll use the 1 chord and the 5 chord. When I play the melody and the chords together, it sounds like this. Another major mode is the Lydian mode. This is obtained by raising the 4th degree of the Ionian scale. This sharp 4 is considered the characteristic note of the Lydian scale. Making the 4 sharp also changes the chords that one would build from the scale. This means the chords associated with a Lydian scale would be 1, 2, 3 minor, sharp 4 diminished, 5, 6 minor, and 7 minor. Any chord containing this characteristic note is what I'll call cadential moving forward. Cadential chords function similarly to dominant chords in tonal music. When writing in a modal key, it's important that you avoid the chord that would be considered the tonic in the parent key. In this case, C Lydian, you would avoid the G major chord. Otherwise, your song will instantly sound tonal. When thinking about modal chord progressions, we can organize based on harmonic function like we did in this video. The new tonic is the one chord in the mode. For example, in C Lydian, it would be C major. The 5 chord is the tonic of the parent scale, so the 5 chord will be the one to avoid if you want a prominent modal sound. Any chord that contains the characteristic note, the sharp 4, is considered cadential. 2, sharp 4 diminished, and 7 minor. The remaining chords will be considered subdominant, the 3 minor and the 6 minor. With these harmonic functions in mind, it's easy to create a Lydian chord progression. Anything cadential will give you the modal sound and have a strong pull to the tonic. This example I'm using for my demonstration is going to be F Lydian, since I wrote the melody in the parent key of C major. This is the same melody I played for the Ionian example, but the chord progression is now a Lydian progression built from these chords. The progression I'll be using is 1, 2, 1, or F, G, F. It sounds like this over the melody. Some Lydian song examples include Dreams by Fleetwood Mac, Man on the Moon by REM, and Human Nature by Michael Jackson. Lydian can be thought of as the brightest mode, even more so than the Ionian mode. This has to do with the gravity that the sharp 4 creates towards the 5. We have that same half-step resolution with the leading tone or the 7th. The same logic in regard to guide tones applies to every other type of scale. For example, any scale that contains the natural 3 and a flat 7 will be considered dominant. The simplest dominant scale being Mixolydian, because its scale is built from those 2 guide tones. This video is only covering the basic modes, so other dominant scales won't be covered here. Again, having this characteristic note, flat 7, instead of natural 7, changes the chords built from the scale. The chords in Mixolydian are 1, 2 minor, 3 diminished, 4, 5 minor, 6 minor, and flat 7. Let's lay out the harmonic functions as well. The 1 chord is the tonic. We'll stick with C for this example. The avoid chord is what would be the tonic in the parent key, the 4 chord. In this case, it's F. Again, cadential chords are any chords that contain the characteristic note of Mixolydian, which is flat 7. So this is, of course, the flat 7 chord, the 3 diminished, and the 5 minor chords. The remaining chords are subdominant, 2 minor and 6 minor. We're using G Mixolydian, which will have the same notes as our parent key, C major. Let's put a Mixolydian chord progression over our melody using these chords. The progression I'm using is 1, 5 minor, 1, or G, D minor, G. Some Mixolydian song examples include Clocks by Coldplay, 7 Bridges Road by the Eagles, and Royals by Lorde. So modal minor scales will be the ones which feature flat 3 and flat 7 as their guide tones. The first modal minor scale is called Dorian. Dorian includes only the flat 3 and the flat 7. Building chords from the Dorian scale gives us these chords: 1 minor, 2 minor, flat 3, 4, 5 minor, 6 diminished, and flat 7. Because Dorian is a minor mode, we compare it to the natural minor, which contains flat 3, flat 6, and flat 7. Since Dorian only has flat 3 and flat 7, this makes the natural 6 the characteristic note of the Dorian sound. So again, any chord containing this natural 6 will be considered cadential to the Dorian mode. The Dorian example I'm using is in D Dorian, since this scale shares notes with the parent key of C major. I'll add a Dorian chord progression to our melody using these chords. The progression I'm using is 1 minor, 4, 1 minor, or D minor, G, D minor. Songs with a Dorian sound include Get Lucky by Daft Punk, Scarborough Fair by Simon and Garfunkel, Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles, and So What by Miles Davis. Another minor mode is Aeolian, which is more commonly referred to as the relative minor or the natural minor. The characteristic note in the Aeolian mode is the flat 6. Of course, this also changes the chord function. Anything containing that flat 6 will be considered cadential. These chords built from the Aeolian scale include 1 minor, 2 diminished, flat 3, 4 minor, 5 minor, flat 6, flat 7, 7. This also means that the flat 3 chord becomes the avoid chord, otherwise the song will lose its modal sound. The Aeolian example I'm using is an A Aeolian, since this scale shares notes with the parent key of C major. I'll add an Aeolian chord progression over our melody using these chords. The progression I'm using is 1 minor, flat 6, 1 minor, or A minor, F, A minor. Some songs with an Aeolian sound include Hello by Adele, All Along the Watchtower by Bob Dylan, and Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven. The last modal minor scale is called Phrygian. This mode includes the flat 3, flat 6, and flat 7, but also a flat 2. Chords built from the Phrygian scale include 1 minor, flat 2, flat 3, 7, 4 minor, 5 diminished, flat 6, and flat 7 minor. The flat 2 is the characteristic note of Phrygian, so any chord containing flat 2 will be considered cadential. The Phrygian example I'm using is an E Phrygian, since the scale shares notes with the parent key of C major. I'll add a Phrygian chord progression to our melody using these chords. The progression I'm using is 1 minor, flat 2, 1 minor, or E minor, F, E minor. While Phrygian is often thought to be one of the rarest modes, I think it's more present than some people think, and it does create a really cool sound. So I'll include some extra examples of this mode. Songs that use Phrygian include Montero by Lil Nas X, Trainer Battle music in Pokemon Red and Blue, Doo-Wop by Lauryn Hill, Gin and Juice by Snoop Dogg, The Jaws theme by John Williams, Set the Controls to the Heart of the Sun by Pink Floyd, Milkshake by Kelis, Speak No Evil by Wayne Shorter, and London Calling by The Clash. The last mode I'm going to talk about today is actually rare, almost never used, and that mode is called Locrian. Though it has a flat 3 and a flat 7, it cannot be considered minor. This is because its characteristic note is a flat 5, and the flat 5 instantly takes us out of minor and into diminished territory. The chords built from this scale are as follows: 1 diminished, flat 2, flat 3, 4 minor, flat 5, flat 6, and flat 7 minor. And of course, any chord containing that flat 5 will be considered cadential. The Locrian example I'm using is in B Locrian, since this scale shares notes with the parent key of C major. I'll add a Locrian chord progression to our melody using these chords. The progression I'm using is 1 diminished, flat 5, 1 diminished, or B diminished, F, B diminished. The lack of resolution in the Locrian mode is what makes it so difficult to write in. In a lot of classical music, it's used as more of a short passage that moves into a different mode altogether, rather than a whole piece centered around the Locrian sound. Locrian was used a lot in avant-garde music in the early 20th century as a means to challenge the concept of tonality. But overall, it's not a very pleasant sound to most listeners, and even most composers, mostly because it's unstable and feels like it really wants to resolve. All of that said, here are some songs that use Locrian mode. Have a listen and see how they make you feel. Dust to Dust by John Kirkpatrick, Army of Me by Bjork, and Je by Claude Debussy. Okay, before I wrap this up, I want to share a tool with you that was passed on to me. This method of classification completely changed the way I understood modes, and thus how I applied them to my own songwriting. Rather than organizing modes based on their place in the Ionian scale, you can organize them from brightest to darkest. That way, when you're writing a song, you'll know exactly what mode will fit the mood of your piece. The order of this would be Lydian, Ionian, Mixolydian, Dorian, Aeolian, Phrygian, and Locrian. Practice your modes this way, and I think you'll have a much easier time internalizing and applying them. I'll demonstrate this by playing all of the examples from earlier. As always, I have some free resources that you can download from my blog that will help you on your journey to learn music. You can find that linked below in the description. I hope that you found this helpful. I encourage you to leave any other modal songs below so that others can listen and better understand the sound that each of these modes has. Also, if you have a favorite mode, tell me what it is. I don't particularly have one, but I know some people do. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Liking, commenting, and sharing are also things that are really helpful. Thanks for watching.